and welcome to Testaments with Jerry. Our collection of oral stories transforms written memories into heartfelt recordings, capturing the voices and experiences of remarkable people who wanted to share their journeys with friends, family, and loved ones. Our goal is to preserve these memories in a way that feels alive, allowing listeners to hear the warmth, wisdom, and individuality of each person's life. We also include end-of-life interviews that honor individuals' reflections and help keep their voices alive for generations to come. My name is Jerry Flanagan, and this is part one of an autobiography written by James J. Davis, who began as an iron puddler employed in the steel mills, working his way up from poverty after emigrating from Wales to America at a young age. He was the visionary who transformed the struggling Loyal Order of Moose in 1906, becoming its supreme organizer and growing it into a massive fraternal order. Another core accomplishment was co-founding the Moose Heart School, an influential educational system for fatherless children, driven by his passion for fraternity and education. The title of the book is The Iron Puddler, My Life in the Rolling Mills and What Came of It, and it chronicles his dramatic rise from an immigrant child experiencing unrequited toil and Southern peonage to becoming the U.S. Secretary of Labor in the Warren Harding administration.
Part 1, Chapter 1. When I was a boy, I learned that the best way to make a book interesting was to start with a fight right in the first chapter. A man who waits several chapters before the action begins is selling peanuts where half the shells are empty. So I must begin by telling you how I finally whipped the town bully in Sharon, Pennsylvania. I will call him Babe Durgan, though I've long since forgotten his real name. This incident took place when I was 18, a time when I considered myself a man, having already become a master puddler in the steel mill and a musician in the town band. I was walking with 2 stove moulders from a nearby factory, and because the day was hot, I offered to treat them to a cool drink. Since soda fountains were not yet common, the only respectable place to take a friend was the tavern. As we entered, Babe Durgan was standing by the bar. He had just come of age, and wanting to intimidate me with his new status, he commanded the barkeeper not to serve me, insisting I was still a minor who could not legally buy beer. I hadn't wanted beer. I was planning on ordering a soft drink. But Babe was relentless, taunting,
"Like hell you was,"
and declaring that he was there to see that no liquor was sold to a child. I was profoundly humiliated, and when my friends looked at me, the fight was inevitable. Knowing that local peace officers would have no jurisdiction, it was customary to walk across the state line to Ohio to fight, and so we headed toward the battleground. I was depressed, knowing I was badly outclassed and possessed no boxing skill, and like many Welshmen, I was too short-legged for a quick escape. Babe was notorious for always choosing younger opponents and was a feared gouger, one who stabs with his sharp thumbnail into the victim's eye. Yet I was driven by a bitter loathing for Babe Durgan, a feeling I had suppressed for 7 years, and which dated back to the summer of 1884 when I was just 11 years old. That first time was the day I wore an ill-fitting second-hand suit to Sunday school. I encountered Babe, and he immediately started the tormenting cry,
little boy, does your mother know you're out with your breeches put on backward and the seams all inside out?"
His words wounded my spirit and left a scar upon my soul. Even now, when I wake from a bad dream, I am often dreaming that I am wearing those crazy breeches while the world jeers at me. This experience made me tender toward any poor child forced to wear hand-me-downs. It also instilled a deep-seated hatred, which was my only advantage, as Babe and I walked to the state line. But before we reached it, Babe suggested,
"What's the use of going any farther? Let's fight here."
We squared off in front of a church school that was half completed. Babe rushed me, trying to gouge my eye, but I threw up my head. His thumb gashed my lips and went into my mouth, nearly knocking me over, but my teeth closed on it. When he jerked back, I regained my balance, clouted him on the jaw, and knocked him down into the lime box, a pit of quick lime used for plastering the uncompleted school. I turned a nearby hose on him, putting him into a lime bath. He was terrified and defeated, choking and weeping until he yelled,
"Enough!"
We helped the crushed bully out and leaned him in a corner, but before I left, I gave him the parting shot. "Do you know why I licked you, babe? It wasn't what you said in the tavern that made me mad. Where you made your mistake was when you made fun of my breeches 7 years ago. I explained that I knew he had been wearing a charity-given blue suit at the time, and I warned him never again to make fun of a boy wearing clothes earned by his own labour. All bullies, whether individuals or nations, get licked when they outrage someone's self-respect." Chapter 2. My people are Welsh, and I was born in Tredegar, Wales. We pride ourselves on persistence and hanging on. We are a nation that has never been whipped, much like David, after whom we name many of our sons, defeated Goliath. The ancient invasions of Britain were always stopped in Wales. Despite this heritage, I did not want to leave Wales when my family emigrated to America. I tried to stay behind, and my mother's final act was reaching under the bed, grabbing my heels and dragging me out of the house feet first. I tore off splinters trying to cling to the floor. Nearly 40 years later, once I had the means, I went back to Tredegar just to walk out of my native village, head up, and of my own free will, clearing my record. The instinct of a Welshman is truly to hang on. From my father, I learned many things, to be proud of skill, and to expect nothing in life that was not won by my own hands. My father and grandfather were iron workers, carrying on a legacy of skill in metal that was passed down strictly within the family because, facing constant problems of bread, they had to think of their own mouths first. My grandfather, who helped build the first blast furnace in Maryland, encouraged my father to emigrate. He said that while the metal existed in Russia, the American mind was right, promising a rich future that Russia might never develop. Father believed that good people yield good fruit, and so he left our ancient home. My mother taught me to sing. She was always working, knitting, sewing, baking, and brewing for 6 children, and always singing songs of praise, thanking God for life and strong hands to labour. I worshipped her and tried to emulate her by taking up singing, though my voice didn't bring me Caruso's returns. I remember her standing at our gate in the dark, holding an old-fashioned lamp high, singing Welsh songs to guide my brother, who was leaving for the day shift, towards the glare of the furnace stacks, and then guiding me, returning wearily from the night shift home. Her voice made my whole life sweet, and whenever hardship or blue days came, the memory of her singing sustained me. In those days, furniture was scarce, and it took Mother a dozen years to acquire 2 feather beds. We considered ourselves rich once we owned 2 bedsteads, though 5 of us boys often slept in one bed, the same bed where babies are born. The weary toiler rests, and the old folks finally sleep. It was the foundation of the household, and those 2 feather beds were Mother's measure of wealth. When Father had saved enough money working in America, he sent for us. My boy chums told me we were going to Pennsylvania to fight Indians, which sounded like a sensible venture, but Mother quickly corrected them, saying we were going to work in a rolling mill, which I thought foolish. As we packed for America, Mother took the feather ticks off the bedsteads and bundled them up to take along. We travelled steerage to Castle Garden. After passing the immigrant tests, we found ourselves on the dock, but our baggage, including those 2 precious feather beds, had disappeared. This was the first true tragedy in my mother's life, transforming the joy of the new land into a crushing dismay. Seeing her anguish, I was sobered to life's responsibilities. As she cried, I prayed that I might grow up in a day, and that God would make my arms strong enough to earn money immediately to replace those lost feather beds. I was not quite 8 years old, and it was April 1881. Before the month was out, I had found a job and was giving all my earnings to Mother, a practice I continued as long as I lived at home. The grief over the lost feather beds turned me from a careless boy into a serious money-maker, driving my study of finance and economics later in life. The loss of our wealth was followed by the loss of 2 children, 4-year-old Walter and 6-year-old David, who got lost in New York's traffic while Mother was piloting us to the depot. Having arrived with 6 children and her goods, she now had neither her goods nor 2 of her boys. She locked the rest of us in a hotel room and spent 2 days searching the streets and police stations. The misery of those scenes instilled in me a lasting terror of being parted from my family. Finally, she found the boys in a rescue home for lost children, where one kind policeman was already applying to adopt my curly-haired brother David. After that ordeal, standing on Broadway looking at the fine buildings and the clothes of the Americans, Mother felt her heart swell with hope, declaring aloud,
"This is the place for my boys."
Father had sent us railroad tickets to Hubbard, Ohio, since the mill in Pittsburgh had shut down. When we boarded the train, Mother smiled sadly when the porter asked for our baggage, noting she was simply grateful to have all her children safe. Everything we owned was on our backs, and Father, out of a job himself, was awaiting us pennilessly. Chapter 3. We eventually moved to Sharon, Pennsylvania, where Father took a temporary job. My mother, however, was dissatisfied with the crowded, soot-blackened conditions in Pittsburgh and insisted on raising her boys amid the sunlight and green grass of Sharon, which was much like the park near Lord Tredegar's castle back home. We rented a neat little company house with a large garden where we raised potatoes, and the company had planted lilacs in the yard, which provided me with joy and inspired me to fill the Mooseheart grounds with lilacs later in life. Immediately upon landing in Sharon, I set out to earn money, driven by the memory of those feather beds. I established a boot blacking business, buying blacking and a brush with 10 cents I earned selling fish I had brushed out of a brook. The shoe shining was my labor, and the brush and blacking were my capital. Additionally, I got a job at the hotel, driving the cows to pasture in the morning and bringing them back at night for $1.25 a month. This job provided my first lesson in political economy. The cost of the cow feed was less than 4 cents a day per cow, but the labor cost, my wages plus the wages of the girls who milked them, more than doubled the cost of the milk. I learned then that labor costs are the chief item in fixing the price of anything. I also saw that Father and my brothers were helping to puddle the iron in the mills that was giving New York its spine, changing a mossy town of wood and stone into a towering city of glass and steel. Father was getting good wages because America's labor-saving machinery meant less labor was put into any product, making it cheap and thus supporting high wages. For 3 years, I attended school while shining shoes and taking odd jobs. I became the telegraph messenger boy, a job that taught me about death because few telegrams were sent unless someone had died. These death messages often meant that the families of mill workers were thrown into hunger, as the breadwinner had made no provision, having no savings or life insurance. I watched collections being taken for widows, who used the cash to pay for funerals and buy tickets to relatives, who then scattered the children for others to raise, sometimes never to see one another again. I heard of one fellow in our union who didn't even know his own name, having been scattered as a child after his father died. I quickly resolved these tragedies into certain propositions. When a laborer dies, his children are scattered. When a man with property dies, his children are kept together. Labor provides for today, but property, a type of capital, provides for tomorrow. This truth was driven home to me, and from that day forward, I argued that we must buy a home and save a little capital every day to protect ourselves from being scattered. My early experiences taught me that toil and struggle are sweet, and that a life well lived is victory. My philosophy had been forged in the hard realities of my first 11 years, concluding that every worker needed capital to safeguard the future, and that every child needed a family to prevent them from being lost to the winds. Chapter 4. By the age of 16, I had achieved the status of a full-fledged master puddler, mastering the secrets of a trade that had been passed down in my family for generations. I was taught by my father to be proud of my skill and to expect no gift from life, demanding that what I received must be won with my hands. This period saw me living a dual existence, a workman hardened by the mill fires and a musician who played the clarinet in the town band. My job as an iron puddler was essentially that of a pig boiler, a crucial, strenuous process necessary to purify the metal. Pig iron contains impurities like silicon, sulfur, and phosphorus, which make it brittle and useless for construction. The mill was a scene of continuous performance, where we fought the furnaces with hooks and rabbles. I would charge the hearth with 600 pounds of pigs, intensively stoke the bituminous coal fire, and then thoroughly stir the molten mass with a 25-pound iron rabble in volcanic heat. Stripped to the waist in summer, my muscles heaving and my hands hardening from the scorching heat, I laboured constantly. My pride stemmed from knowing that we were achieving something grand, changing a country built of wood into one of steel and stone. The whole arduous task was an effort to defeat nature, which refuses to yield pure iron easily, and to wrestle the purified metal from her grip. Having proven myself a man physically, I immediately faced an industrial problem. As my father was not ready to step down, I had to find my own furnace. I left Sharon for Pittsburgh when I was 18, but the job I secured was unstable, as hard times had returned in 1891 and 92. The iron district was choked with desperate, idle men. Recognizing that I shouldn't hold a steady furnace when others had families to feed, I soon left Pittsburgh, wandered to Niles, Ohio, where the mill quickly shut down, and eventually decided to work my way south as the north seemed closed off. This widespread unemployment deeply affected me, but it also forced me to think economically. I advised my father against joining the roaming millions, suggesting it was better to remain in Sharon with his partially paid-for home and garden than to incur the expense of hunting fruitless jobs elsewhere. We young men, having read newspapers, had a wider view and understood that the depression was universal. My advice was a successful economic prediction and showed me the power of using my head to solve problems. My travels were often undertaken via freight trains, as I preferred to save the money I would have spent on tickets and send it home to mother. On this journey, I encountered Frank Bannerman, a communist theorist at a junction. He plied me with radical literature and watermelons, flattering my intellect. I realized quickly that his fervor was based not on fact, but on a brimstone of envy. This became clear when he violently cursed the trainloads of well-dressed Knights of Pythias members passing by, believing them to be blood-sucking parasites. I knew these people were ordinary workers and professionals who had simply saved for their trip. I realized then that envy was the sulfur in human pig iron, preventing men from welding together in fellowship. The communist pamphlets I read, which claimed that a money panic would soon starve American workers, or that Wall Street was destined to own everything, highlighted my lack of historical and economic knowledge. I decided that having a trade alone was insufficient. I needed an education to determine if the theories I was hearing were true. I eventually reached Birmingham, Alabama, and found a job and lodging. When the industrial depression reached rock bottom, the Birmingham iron workers went on strike. I joined a large group of strikers heading to Louisiana, hunting desperately for work and food. In New Orleans, I worked odd jobs, using my small earnings and kitchen scraps to keep my hungry comrades from starving in the flop houses. Despite my efforts to save money and avoid trouble, I was falsely accused and sent to a chain gang by a kangaroo court when guarding a woman's jewels to prevent theft. I ultimately shipped out with my gang to work on a river levee. There I was practically forced into peonage deep in the swamps of Louisiana. The boss was a cutthroat slave driver, Simon Legree, who who epitomized brutal labor exploitation. Since I lacked skill with a mule team and scraper, the job quickly broke me, resulting in a violent injury to my face and being fired without pay. I realized then that the oratorical complaints of wage slavery were a joke. Real slavery, the lash-driven, swamp-sick variety, was far worse. I tramped back to New Orleans, relying on trading an old ring for a quarter and bartering raw bacon for corn pone. After a month, my gang returned from the peon camp, having been cheated of all their wages, yet relieved to be out alive. My comrades, having experienced true forced labor, declared, "If daily wages is slavery, God grant that they never set us free again." We had learned that the theory of avoiding work only led to hunger, misery, and peonage. The period of hard times finally began to ebb with the return of good crops, though the sick economic state was slow to recover, like a starving man who can only assimilate food slowly.
This concludes Part 1 of The Iron Puddler. Part 2, From Peonage to Politics, A Life of Labor and Logic, will be posted soon. Please follow us for updates. Please message us if you'd like to share a memoir or autobiography of a loved one on our Testaments with Jerry platform. Thank you for listening.